Welcome to episode 45 of Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. Today I am joined by empowerment wellness coach Louisa Valentin. And being a healthcare worker, you'd think that the workplace stress and the long shifts would have burnt Louisa out. But it was actually her people pleasing and not setting those boundaries, serving others, and diminishing her energy reserves that resulted in her burnout. And this is something that we're all probably guilty of, pleasing others and serving them and putting them first before ourselves. And as a result, completely burning ourselves out. So I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Louisa and let me know what you think. You can reach out at eugene.leeway on Instagram, giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, or shoot me an email, eugene@leeway.ie. Thank you, and I really hope you enjoyed today's episode with Louisa Valentin. Louisa Valentin, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you for joining the show.
Hey, Eugene, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate you sharing your platform with me.
Of course. And Louisa, being an empowerment wellness coach, I found that coaches normally follow a similar pattern. I've seen this a lot on the show, and we start off having this rock bottom moment or this moment of realization that we need to change something in our lives to better ourselves. And somewhere along this personal growth and development journey, we get this spark or vision that leads us into coaching, whether that's part of our personal growth that we want to serve others, or maybe we just don't want other people to go through the pain that we went through. So what was that like for you? And why do you do what you do?
So, I have actually had a few burnout moments, and being a nurse for almost 20 years, I'm sure you can imagine how I'm always giving and giving and giving myself to others. And that's something that's been with me since I was even a child, which is what propelled me into nursing. But you can only give but so much before it all becomes too much, where I've tried to give myself to my family and I'm giving myself to my patients and I've given myself to my friends. Where is it that I'm able to give to myself? And so I remember a few years ago, I just was so overwhelmed with everything that I had to do. And I knew I had goals. I knew that I wanted to do for myself as well, but I just didn't have the time. And the more that I gave, the more I poured into everyone else. It just left me completely empty, where the opposite started to happen. I started to retract from people. I started to retract from going out. I started to retract at work, and I was just frustrated, and my answers were short. And where I used to be this happy, bubbly individual, I just didn't have it in me anymore. I couldn't even fake it until one day it was like that's it. I'm just done, and I threw everything to the side. I just needed to get back to me. And what triggered it, it's funny, it was actually a picture. And while that seems so superficial, it wasn't just the way that I did not like the way that I looked in this picture. It was that I didn't look like myself. I looked sad. I looked lost. And I remember posing for that picture thinking that I was able to put on the facade of being the happy person that I normally was. But I was able to see with my own eyes that it it wasn't working. It it wasn't convincing. It couldn't even convince me. So how could it convince everyone else? So that was like my breaking point in that situation.
Yeah, I 100% get that, where you put up you put up a veil and you're trying to, let's say, fake it till you make it in a sense. And there's only so much faking you can do. And yes, you cover that very well there. It's kind of, I even noticed it myself before. I was trying to fake it as well. And I was trying to still be happy go lucky and be the positive energy in the room. But it was some of my closest friends who noticed. They were like, "You're not your normal bubbly self. And you tend to zone out a lot more often. What's going on?" And I didn't even notice it myself. I was like, "Oh, I'm probably just tired. I've just worked a long shift. I'm probably just tired. It's nothing." And they were like, "No, there's probably something deeper going on here." But in hindsight, I can see that now. I'm like, of course, I was burnt out then. I just was in denial that I didn't see it as part of my identity. I was like, no, you're high achieving, you're high performance, always high energy. You don't burn out. You don't have the time to burn out.
Oh, I completely resonate with that. Not having the time to burn out. Exactly, exactly, exactly. Because if I burn out, how am I going to be there for all of these people that need me? How am I going to be able to take care of people's lives if I'm burnt out? How am I going to be there to help my parents if I'm burnt out? So I didn't have time, and I just had to keep on moving forward. And my focus was making sure everybody else was happy, pleasing everyone else so that they could keep progressing, so that they could keep moving forward. And just like you, being in denial about myself because I didn't have time for that. And it would disappoint others. And we are so apt at trying to make sure we can please everyone else that we put ourselves on the back burners. And that is exactly what I did for many, many, many years.
Yeah, because I think it's especially in healthcare when you're a caregiver, and it's no longer, it's not just a profession, it's a vocation to help others. And I think when you're in a caregiving position, you feel you have no right to burn out. You have no time to take for yourself. It's because you don't want to let down the people that you care for. And you can't take time off. You can't take a mental health day because they probably still need help getting out of bed in the morning. They still need help getting their medications right. And you feel that you're doing them a disservice by taking time to take care of yourself.
Oh, definitely. And even my coworkers, because if I didn't show up, who was there to be their support? Who was there to help them with the patients that we were overloaded with at times? So life was just always about everybody else.
Yeah, of course, because you'd feel guilty if you were to take a day off and someone else has to work a double shift. And you wouldn't want to work a double shift yourself. And when you find yourself working double shifts, I feel that you're so mentally and physically fatigued from long hours. More than likely inside, you probably haven't seen daylight in 16 hours or longer. I've heard many cases where it's been longer, and it's hard to make logical decisions when you're that fatigued. And there's also the sense of responsibility that comes there where you feel, am I responsible for making medical decisions for a patient when I can barely think straight myself?
Oh, yes, definitely. And I was one of those people who would end up working that 16 hours and not knowing what daylight looked like because I went in when it was dark and I left when it was dark. And it does take such a toll on you, and it does interfere with your ability to think critically and to help people the way that we sign up to do, because we just don't have it in us, where we're just going through the motions. And that's where I felt like I was going through the motions of life, just trying to help and please as many people as possible. Again, putting myself on the back burner.
And going through the motions. It's like for me, I always describe that as being an autopilot. And I realized that I was just going through the job. It was like I didn't have purpose in the job. I just felt like it was on autopilot. And I think it was a moment of realization where I was like, do you enjoy the work you do every day? And sometimes I was like, I do the work every day. It's convenient because hey, I've been doing it for such a long time. But I don't take particular enjoyment, or I don't get job satisfaction or fulfillment because some of the tasks are, as you said, like just you're going through the motions and you're not able to think straight when you're working long hours. You're just like, okay, I'm just going from A to B, but not actually critically thinking in the process or being present. And that's something that I feel is really important in no matter what your work is or your vocation, that you're present in the work that you're doing and engaged and connected and being able to connect with team members and colleagues and your managers. That I feel all that has to come into place for you to really prevent yourself from burning out. You can rely on your teammates, and that you don't take, as you said, kind of setting that boundary where you feel you can take a day off and that it won't negatively influence you, that you feel you're doing a disservice to your team and to your patients.
Yeah. Yeah, because once you're not able to think, once you're not able to give and be present, like you said, and make those connections, then it becomes almost a waste. You become a body, just another number. And you don't want to treat your patients or the people that you work with or your colleagues like a number. You want to be able to connect with them on that visceral level where you're understanding their needs and able to bounce off ideas and plans to follow through with. Because if you're not planning with your patients, clients, colleagues, then you're again just going through those motions and everything becomes aimless. It's just a task at a time. And that's the only way that you're functioning, one task at a time, before I can finally get out of here, before I can finally go do something else, before I can finally take a nap or even take 5 minutes to breathe on your own. So that's something that I was not doing efficiently. I was not connecting because I just needed to do the most things instead of what were the best things, the things that made the most sense. Priorities, it kind of went out the window when it just became a task oriented profession.
Yeah. And I think one thing you did cover there was when you're going through the motions, especially when you're dealing with patients. And if you're just going through the motions, being like, look, I have to get through all these tasks today. I have to go from patient A to patient B to patient C. And again, even phrasing it like that, you're depersonalizing the patients and the tasks you have to do from patient to patient. You're probably putting a timer on how much time you can spend with each patient if you have a massive workload. And they can pick up on that too, that you're not spending 5 or 10 minutes to ask them, how is your day? How are you really getting on today? Is it a good day? Is it a bad day? And making them feel heard. Again, connecting to them on a human level, because they're probably stuck in the bed all day, or they've been alone all night, and this might be the only human contact that they have, or let our personal contact they have with a human all day is with a healthcare worker, and they can sense that too. Is it and is it, let's say, gaining that awareness, does that come from, let's say, a patient or a colleague speaking up, being like, hey, you're not acting yourself, or hey, that patient felt a bit ignored, or uh, you seemed to brush over them, or brush over something they were trying to say? Uh, does a colleague or a patient, let's say, bring your awareness to the fact that you're just going through the motions?
Well, at the time, I luckily was able to at least fake it till I make it for my patients. But I had family members that were saying, you're just not all there. And you're snapping. Like you're very snappy right now. When, like I said, I was normally happy go lucky. I'm the kumbaya one in the family. And they were just wondering why my temper was so short, why I would do everything. I would take on all the tasks, but then I would be upset about it. I would take it personally, like, oh my goodness, here's another task that somebody threw on me, and now I got to get it done. And I did a lot of blaming. I pushed a lot of that on other people, but then I had to realize my responsibility and setting up boundaries, being able to say, no, this is too much. Or the task that I did decide to take on, set up, okay, I can do this within this time frame or at this time, or even say, I can't do this right now. I have a lot going on, but come back to me and maybe we can talk about it. But just learning to set up those boundaries where it also made space for me to start taking care of myself. So I had that time where, of course, my profession, my vocation, like you say, I have to take care of my patients. So I made sure that was a priority while I was at work. And in other spaces in my life, I decided to build in those breaks where I had time for me and it wasn't just give, give, give to everyone else. It was, okay, here's your time, but this is my time. And right now I can't do that. And that's when I started building in my habits to create the life that I'm currently living now.
And when it came to setting those boundaries, how did you approach, let's say, your management or your workplace and in setting those boundaries? How did they take it?
At first, it took a little time for them to get used to Louisa speaking up and saying, no, I'm not going to do that overtime. And no, I am not going to do this during my lunch hour. And I thought in my mind that everybody that I set up a boundary with, they would be very upset, that they would dislike me or the world would fall apart, but it didn't. And usually people were fine with it. People understood where they could, that okay, I have to move on to the next person, or I have to take care of this for myself, or maybe I'll ask her later and see if she has time for this or if this is something that she is willing to do. But for me personally, at least, people seemed to respect my boundaries as long as they saw that I was serious about them. Because oftentimes we'll try to put up boundaries, but then we backpedal and go ahead and let people break those boundaries. And I myself did that many, many times where I was like, no, I can't do that. But if they would try to talk me out of it, I would let them. So it wasn't until I found my voice and my stance that I was able to actually keep those boundaries up. And then they became respected because they didn't have a choice.
Yeah, that's very, because I find that a lot of people, especially if they had a problem with people pleasing in the past, that they can't set those boundaries because they're afraid of upsetting too many people. And it's about trying to realize that some people are going to respect them and other people won't respect them at first. But it's about setting your own standards and being like, look, if you want me to do this at my best capability, I'm going to have to put these boundaries in place so that I don't slack off. I want to come here and serve at my best. And if you don't allow me to do that, then yes, there will be consequences if I slack off. But I'm trying to show up at my best at all times. And that's kind of how you approach them, is like, I want to serve you at my full potential. And this is how I feel I can do it. And trying to, yes, you do have to compromise in some situations. You might be like, I need an hour lunch break, and they're like, how about 45 minutes so that we can have a crossover between our staff changeover for 15 minutes. And it's like, okay, that kind of works. At least I get my lunch break. But yeah, it's about trying to set the boundaries and um compromise reasonably, that it still serves you and serves them in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I like what you said there with the compromise, because for me, what it became was creating small boundaries first and then building upon that. I did not try to go from 0 to 100, like from doing everything to I'm not doing anything at all and everything is a no. So with what I do, it's about those small changes. Small changes create big results. And that, I think, is what helped me to put up these boundaries and to be able to be consistent with them earlier on, versus if I just try to do a whole upheaval of everything that I was for 30 plus years.
And when it came to, let's say, setting those boundaries, what was the mindset shift for you? What happened there so that you were like, okay, this is, let's say you have your moment of realization, and now you're aware that you need to set those boundaries. You need to stop people pleasing so much. That, let's say, of course, that process doesn't happen overnight. The same way as you burning out didn't happen overnight, it happens over a long period of time. And especially like chronic burnout can take, so some people it can be, for me it was over 4 or 5 years. It was about 4.5 years before it completely burnt me out. And it's like that moment of realization, especially, oh, now that you've realized this, you can recover overnight. Now that you've realized you're going to make those changes, but it's hard to make those changes straight off the bat because you've conditioned yourself over those years working so hard. And now that you've come to that realization, you're trying to set those boundaries. It's very easy to slip back and be like, okay, maybe I don't need to take all of these breaks. Maybe I can slack off on a few breaks. It's how do you shift your mindset into being disciplined and be like, no, I need to take this time off for myself and so that I can serve others better.
So with that, one, do like I said, with the small boundaries and then growing from there, it was kind of like a test run. It was a test for them, but also a test for myself. So instead of, again, just trying to make all these huge changes, I got to see how I felt, how good it felt when I put up that boundary and kept with it, and saw that the world didn't fall apart and nobody hated me when I put that boundary up. So it almost became a little bit of a dopamine hit to be able to say, oh, I did that. I stood up for myself. And while there have been slip backs and, people are going to try to get across those boundaries, just remembering my why, remembering how it felt when I was burned out, when I did not have any boundaries. It's always for me about remembering the why I'm doing something versus just that I have to do it. Because when I only focus on the end, it's real easy to forget how how you felt before, or how tired I was, or how frustrated I was. If I'm just thinking about, oh, you just got to put up a boundary, so just put up the boundary. That doesn't work without the knowing behind it.
Yeah, it's kind of like building habits. That setting that boundary is a new habit, and you're going to have to start small.
Yes.
And it's not simply it's the same as any exercise habit. If you're trying to build up small, you have to have a reason behind it. You have to have your standard and your goal, and you have to believe and trust in that process for it to take effect in your life. If, as you said, with setting a boundary, it can be easy to forget why you set that boundary in the first place if you don't know the true reason why you had to set it. If the pain point has to be strong enough, you have to realize, look, I'm doing this for a reason. I don't want to fall back into that scenario. And I think that's where my approach always has been when it comes to setting any habit, setting any boundary, setting any standard. It's I decided to do this in the first place for a reason, and I can't forget that reason because if I start slipping back, I know I'm going to fall back into that painful situation.
Precisely. And with everything, like you said, I love how you mentioned with other habits in your life, because I believe in habit stacking. I believe you start here. Once you get accustomed to this one habit or one boundary, you can build upon it and you can stack another one on top of it, where you're making all these small changes to get to that bigger goal, instead of just focusing on whatever the goal is and getting there by any means necessary. 0 to 100 rarely works. And when it does, it is not sustainable at all. So we move at that steady pace.
Yeah, and I think another thing, it's something that came up in the past. I was talking to another healthcare worker, and he was talking about the difference between caregiving and caretaking. And it was a very interesting concept because he was like, caregiving is that you're giving from yourself to serve others, whereas caretaking is you are putting your self worth in how much you take care of others. So it's taking from your it's almost being selfish that you're only taking care of them to fulfill your own needs to feel self worth, rather than coming from a place of abundance, being like, I'm coming here at my full capacity so that I can serve you, I can serve others.
Yeah, I really love that. And I was definitely the caretaker earlier on in life. And I've had to learn and teach myself, and with even the guidance of others, become that caregiver.
Yeah, it was such an interesting concept when he introduced me to it. I was, and it was something that I felt, yes, people have that vocation to serve others, but often it comes from a place of their own, of not believing in themselves and not really valuing their own self worth. That they feel that they need to serve others, and if they ever stop serving others, then they've lost their purpose. And yeah, where do you think that feeling of self worthlessness or not fully valuing someone's self worth, especially in healthcare, where do you feel that comes from?
I think for different people, it comes from different spaces. A lot of people in their childhood, there was something that they were missing, where they were always looking for that approval from others. And I could say, even from myself, there are times where I was excuse me, one of four children. So my parents had to divide their attention. And while I believe I had a great childhood, there were times where I wasn't the priority. So you have to do things to become the priority. And one of the things that I did was help take care of others. I helped with my younger siblings. That's where it probably started. I helped with my cousins who would come over and my mom would watch. So always looking for that approval there, like, look, I'm helping, I'm doing good, right? And then, usually the parents or whoever will say, oh, look how helpful Louisa is. She's doing X, Y, and Z. And again, that's like another boost. And it just can follow some of us into healthcare where, oh, I had to be the star of the show. I had to be the charge nurse every night. I had to make sure everything was working the way that it was supposed to on the unit, or everything would fall apart. And then everybody would look at me as if, she didn't quite keep it all together. And then that appearance is not there, then I'm not getting that approval.
Yeah, I've actually found that interesting because I've heard that people who were adult pleasers as children become people pleasers later on in life, that they feel that was their duty when they were a child, that they were there to always please adults, whether that be their parents or uncles or aunts or uh, other authority figures in their life, that they were always there to please them, that they'd always put the adults and the elderly first before their own priorities and self-worth, that they had to please them first before they'd please themselves. And uh, I feel, yeah, that comes a lot into play when it comes to healthcare, that you've been that people pleaser ever since you were a child, and you're following into your adulthood still caring for the elderly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely, for a long time, and I still care. I still give a lot of myself in that way, but it's not at the expense of myself anymore. And that's what the difference is. I can still give, but I make sure that I'm nurturing myself and I'm taking that time for me versus just being that caretaker that you mentioned before. And now I can actually be that caregiver because I have a lot to give because my cup is full enough to be able to give.
Yes, 100%. Again, filling your cup first before serving others, rather than shaking out every last drop until your arm falls off. Um, yeah, when you're and again, when it comes to coaching, you're helping to serve others in another capacity also. So beyond caregiving as a healthcare worker, you're now serving in another capacity so that others can stop being caretakers and realize that they have more purpose. If they set their own boundaries, they can serve others, that they can care for others to a greater extent by setting those boundaries and by stopping the people pleasing and people serving instead. That they're not tying their self worth to taking care of others, and they're not tying their self worth to working overtime, working long hours so that they don't disappoint their team, they don't disappoint their manager, that they don't leave someone else work that extra shift, and having that overhanging you even when you need to take that day off, when you need to take that recovery day.
Yeah. And that is so vital that we realize that we don't have to be all the things for all the people all the time. Yes, we have our priorities, but we have to learn to make ourselves a priority as well. And that's one of the things that I do with the women that I work with. I help them to learn that they matter just as much as everyone else. And if they keep on giving, giving, giving the same way that I did, they'll get to that burnt out state. They won't be able to come out of it unless they put up those boundaries, unless they take the time for their own self care to know their own self worth outside of everything that they do for everyone else or taking care of everything external without worrying about their internal.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So if anyone listening in today feels that they're in that position where they might feel that they're a caretaker, or they feel that they're overworked in healthcare, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to hear more about your experience, or maybe get involved in maybe jumping on a call with you for coaching? What's the best place for them to get in touch?
Sure. If they would like to get on a discovery call with me, they can reach me at louisavalentin.coach. That's Louisa, V as in Victor, Alentin.coach, COACH. Or they can find me on my Facebook page, Coaching with Louisa, just on Facebook, just like that. I think all of my socials now at this point have coaching with Louisa.
Awesome, brilliant. I can stick that in the show notes as well.
Sure, thank you.
Awesome, brilliant. Thanks for joining the call, Louisa. And yeah, it was great chatting with you.
Thank you again, Eugene, for sharing your space with me. It's always a good time talking to you.